What if your Social Security check isn't actually guaranteed at today's level? Millions of Americans hear Social Security is going bankrupt and assume their benefits could simply disappear. That's not the full story. The real issue is what Congress does before the system faces a major funding gap, and one mistake could leave you planning with the wrong numbers. Welcome to American Dream Finance. In this video, we'll break down what Congress is considering in 2026, what's actually true, and what you should do now. Stay until the end because you'll get a simple framework to protect your retirement plan no matter what Congress decides. The real Social Security problem in 2026. If you keep hearing that Social Security is going bankrupt, stop for a moment. That phrase makes the situation sound worse than it actually is. Social Security is facing a real financing problem, but bankrupt does not mean Social Security suddenly disappears. Here is what the latest numbers actually show. According to the 2026 Social Security Trustees Report, the OASI Retirement and Survivors Trust Fund is projected to run out of reserves in the fourth quarter of 2032. If Congress makes no changes before then, incoming revenue would still be enough to pay about 78% of scheduled OASI benefits. That distinction matters. It means the biggest risk is not that your Social Security check suddenly becomes zero. The risk is that Congress waits too long to change the system and then has to make a much more painful adjustment. And this is where the conversation gets political. Some proposals focus on reducing future benefits. Others focus on increasing revenue. Some would change the amount of income subject to Social Security taxes, and some proposals combine several approaches. One proposal discussed in the interview you provided is the Social Security 2100 Act, which would increase revenue from higher earners while also changing benefits. But there is an important correction to the original conversation. The interview says Social Security taxes in 2026 stop at about $185,000. The official 2026 taxable maximum is actually $184,500. That may sound like a small difference, but when you're discussing federal policy, the exact number matters. Under current law, earnings above that taxable maximum are not subject to the 6.2% Social Security payroll tax for employees. Medicare taxes work differently and do not have the same wage ceiling. So imagine two workers. One earns $80,000, another earns $800,000. The second person earns 10 times as much, but Social Security payroll taxes do not continue indefinitely on every dollar of that $800,000 under current law. That is one reason increasing the taxable maximum has become such an important part of the policy debate. But there is another important correction. The interview suggests that the combined Social Security system would face a major shortfall around 2032. The 2026 Trustees Report is more specific. The OASI Retirement Trust Fund is projected to be depleted in 2032, while the combined OASI and DI trust funds are projected to remain able to pay scheduled benefits until 2034. At that point, about 83% of scheduled combined benefits would be payable from continuing income under the trustees' projections. So when you hear someone say, Social Security runs out in 2032, don't automatically assume that means every Social Security benefit ends in 2032. It doesn't. The real issue is the financing gap between the money coming into the system and the benefits scheduled under current law. And that is exactly why what Congress does next matters. Because every year lawmakers wait, they have fewer choices. They can raise more revenue, they can change benefit formulas, they can adjust taxes, they can change other program rules, or they can combine several smaller changes instead of relying on one dramatic cut or tax increase. For someone who is 60 today, this isn't an abstract Washington debate. For someone who is 35, it's even more important.
You may have decades before claiming Social Security, but the decisions Congress makes during those decades can affect the benefit formula, taxes, retirement planning, and how much you personally need to save. And here's the most important point. Don't build your retirement plan around either extreme. Don't assume Social Security will disappear, but don't assume today's rules are guaranteed to remain unchanged forever either. The 2026 Trustees Report itself says legislative action is needed to prevent OASI reserve depletion. That is the actual problem Congress has to solve, not panic, not headlines, a long-term funding problem that requires a political decision. And that brings us to the bigger question: what can Congress realistically change without pushing the entire burden onto retirees, workers, or higher-income Americans? That is where the real debate begins.
So, if the problem is a long-term funding gap, what can Congress actually do? There is no magic button. Every serious solution comes down to some combination of more revenue, different benefits, or changes to the rules. One of the biggest ideas is to make higher earners contribute Social Security taxes on more of their income. Under current law, the 2026 taxable maximum is $184,500. One proposal discussed in the interview would create a gap above that amount and then apply Social Security taxes again once earnings reach a much higher level. The basic idea is simple. Workers with ordinary incomes would continue paying under today's system, while very high earners would contribute more. But there is an important correction to the interview. The interview describes the 2100 approach as if the $400,000 threshold were simply an existing 2026 law. It is not current law. It is part of proposed legislation and policy debate. That's an important distinction. When you hear Congress is going to tax income above $400,000 for Social Security, don't treat that as something already enacted. It's a proposal, not today's rule. Another possible approach is changing benefits. That could mean increasing benefits for some retirees, changing how benefits are adjusted for inflation, or modifying the formula used to calculate future benefits. But this is where things become politically difficult. Retirees plan around expected benefits. If Congress suddenly changes the rules for people who are already close to retirement, millions of Americans could be forced to rethink their plans. That's why many reform proposals try to protect current retirees while making larger changes for younger workers. There is also the question of the retirement age. Raising the full retirement age could reduce the value of benefits relative to current law, depending on how the change is designed. But it isn't a simple solution. Someone who works in an office may be able to work into their late 60s. Someone who has spent decades doing physically demanding work may have a very different reality. So a policy that looks reasonable on paper can have very different effects on real Americans. And there's another option that often gets overlooked. Do several smaller things instead of one huge change. For example, Congress could combine additional revenue from higher earners with modest changes to benefit formulas and other adjustments. That spreads the impact across the system, instead of placing the entire burden on one group. This is why you should be careful when you hear a politician say, "We can fix Social Security with one simple change." The math is more complicated than that. The 2026 Trustees Report makes the central issue clear. Social Security needs legislative action before the reserves are depleted.
But that does not tell us exactly which political solution Congress will choose. And that's an important distinction for your retirement planning. You don't need to predict the exact bill Congress will eventually pass. Instead, build a plan that can survive several possible outcomes. If you're in your 30s or 40s, focus heavily on your own retirement savings through accounts such as a 401k, IRA, or taxable investment account when appropriate. If you're in your 50s or 60s, pay closer attention to your expected Social Security benefit, claiming strategy, healthcare costs, and how much income you can generate outside Social Security. And regardless of your age, don't make a major retirement decision based on a social media headline saying Social Security is finished. It isn't. But the system does need to be addressed. The smartest response is not panic, it's preparation. And that leads to the final question. What should you actually do today if you're worried about Social Security?
Now let's bring this back to your personal finances. You cannot control what Congress does, but you can control how dependent your retirement plan is on one government program. First, check your actual Social Security record. Create or review your My Social Security account and look at your earnings history and estimated benefits. Don't rely on a random calculator or a social media post. Your earnings record matters because your benefit is based on your work history and the earnings recorded by the Social Security Administration. Second, look at your retirement savings. Ask yourself a simple question. If Social Security provided less income than I expect, could my retirement plan still work? You don't have to assume a 20% cut is coming. You don't have to assume your benefits will disappear. Instead, run a conservative scenario. For example, compare your retirement plan using your expected Social Security benefit and another scenario using a somewhat lower benefit. If your plan falls apart immediately, that's useful information. It tells you that you may need more savings, a longer working period, lower retirement spending, or another source of retirement income. Third, be careful about claiming decisions. Social Security isn't simply a check you turn on whenever you want. The age at which you claim affects your monthly benefit, and delaying benefits can increase the monthly amount up to age 70. That doesn't mean everyone should wait until 70. Your health, life expectancy, marital situation, income needs, taxes, and other retirement assets all matter. There is no universal best claiming age. Fourth, don't stop saving because you believe Congress will fix everything. And don't stop saving because you believe Congress will destroy Social Security. Both assumptions can lead to bad decisions. A better approach is save as if Social Security will be part of your retirement, but don't make it your entire retirement plan. And finally, pay attention to what Congress actually passes. There's a huge difference between a proposal, a bill introduced in Congress, a bill passed by Congress, and a law signed and implemented. That distinction is especially important in 2026 because Social Security reform is being discussed heavily, but discussion is not the same thing as enacted law. So when you see a headline saying Congress is cutting Social Security, ask, what bill? What provision? Who does it affect? When would it take effect? And has it actually become law? That 5-second habit can protect you from making a major financial decision based on a misleading headline. The bigger lesson is this. Social Security has a real financial problem, but Social Security is going bankrupt is an oversimplification. The 2026 trustees' projections show that the retirement trust fund faces depletion in 2032 under current law. But Social Security would still have incoming revenue to pay a substantial portion of scheduled benefits if Congress made no changes. Congress, therefore, has a real decision to make. It can act earlier when there are more options, or it can wait and potentially face tougher choices later. For you, the answer is much simpler. Know your numbers. Keep saving. Understand your Social Security estimate. Don't panic over headlines. And most importantly, don't let uncertainty become an excuse to stop planning. Because the goal isn't to predict exactly what Congress will do. The goal is to build a retirement plan that can handle whatever Congress eventually decides. Stay informed, stay flexible, and keep control of the part of your financial future that you actually control.